in this great event, guest lecture on plantation pests and diseases. Okay, thank you for the enthusiasm from audience, and of course, this enthusiasm must be maintained until this in the end of this event. Okay, to take advantage of this time, let's open this event by saying Basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In this pleasure moment, I would like to welcome the Honorable Dr. Jochen Drescher as our speaker from University of Gottingen, Germany, and then the Honorable Professor Dr. Damayanti Bukhari, MSc, as our moderator, and obviously my distinguished audience, and of course, all of my beloved friends. Next, let us praise to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Because of His bless and mercy, we can come together here without any obstacles, attending the guest lecture, which will discuss about
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, everyone. Okay. Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to say welcome to Dr. Jochen Drescher from Germany. To Department of Plant Protection, and who will give a lecture to our student. And second, I would like to express my gratitude to Dr. Jochen, who has been willing to come here to give a lecture on topic on land use change effect on Arthropod Diversity, evident from Jambi Province. I think this topic is very interesting to enrich our student insight in studying insect diversity, especially for undergraduate student in the class of the principle of plant health. And this lecture not only attended by undergraduate student, but also graduate student, but not only in this room, but also in online. Yeah. I think there are more than 50 students attending by online. Hopefully, this lecture can provide benefits in enriching plant protection science for student or for lecturer or I think for lecturer or faculty member that attend this lecture. Okay, I think that's just my introduction to this lecture. Enjoy the lecture that will give by Dr. Jochen. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good.
Thank you, Dr. Ali, for the speech. And then now I will read about the attendance direction. Next. Next. I will read about the attendance direction. To all the audience, please to turn off or mute your microphone. And then please write your question in that column, in chat column on Zoom with the format is name, street, institution, street question. I will repeat it again, name, street, institution, street question. And the link of presents will be given after discussion session. So please listen and follow the guest lecture until complete. And I will deliver about the structure of this event. It will be opening and then continue with briefing from Dr. Ali Nurmansyah, MSI. And then there will be a photo session, and moderator will be guiding the lecture and discussion session. And then the speaker, Dr. Jochen Drescher, will be presenting the materials, and then discussion session, closing statement, certificate appreciation, and the last one is closing. Okay, and now I will be read about the CV of our moderator, Professor Dr. Damayanti Bukhari, MSc. Professor Damayanti got her undergraduate degree from IPB University, majoring in Department of Pest and Plant Diseases, and then got magister and studied her magister program in USA, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and then got her PhD from Indiana University at Bloomington, USA. Professor Damayanti Bukhari, MSc, have a lot of work experience. In 2004 until present, Professor Damayanti held a position as editor-in-chief of the Indonesian Journal of Entomology. And then in 2018 until present, Professor Damayanti held a position as Director, Center for Transdisciplinary and Sustainability Science in IPB University. And in 2020 until present, Professor Damayanti is an Indonesian Academy of Sciences. And Professor Damayanti has an interest of work experience and research in interdisciplinary research on sustainable landscape. And today, and now I will give this event to our moderator, Professor Damayanti Bukhari, MSc. Please welcome Professor Damayanti.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I've been asked to stand in the middle so everyone can see me. Okay, so first of all, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Yang terhormat Bapak Ketua Departemen, Pak Ali, yang terhormat Bapak Jochen Drescher, dan yang terhormat Pak Pur, Pak Nazir, semua teman-teman, senang sekali berada di sini. Dan there are 50 people in Zoom, ya, 50 ya, 50. 61, so there's 61 in Zoom, and I think about, I don't know how many here, 40 or so you have about 100 attendance. I would like to welcome Jochen to today's seminar. Very happy to have you here, and thank you so much for making the time. So for the next 1.5 hours, we will be listening to the presentation that Jochen has on land use in Jambi. But first of all, allow me to read CV of Jochen Drescher. So I think the people in Zoom, you can read it there also. So basically, Jochen Drescher, is that how you said your name? Drescher. Oh my God, it's hard. The R is on the back. Okay. Anyway, Jochen, he's from the Department of Animal Ecology and part of the CRC. So for those of you who don't know, CRC, it's a long-term collaboration between Indonesia and Germany, and it has been going on for 10 years or so, 11 years, 10 10 to 12 years, and it's still going on for another 2 years. So Jochen knows a lot about Indonesia since he's been associated with the research project from the start. And oh, Jochen is gone. What happened? Ah, okay. Oops. Okay. So he has lots of research and publication. I'm not going to read all of it, but jangan saya lagi. Oh, it's automatic. That's weird. So he received his PhD from Würzburg, and I think you can see that it's gone on the screen. It's okay. But basically, let us start because it's 1:25, and we all are very eager to hear today's presentation. So let us start with Jochen's presentation. And oops, yeah, there's been a little bit of technical issue since it's gone. Okay. So for the viewers at Zoom, it's fine. Jochen is here, so he can start talking while listening to, while waiting for the PowerPoint presentation to come up again. So Jochen, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. First question regarding the time, that's 30 minutes roughly?
30, 40 minutes
30,
is fine.
something. So first of all, hello everybody, and deep apologies for being late a little bit, but I think we are on time now. Maybe until we fix the technical things, just a few words to the abbreviation CRC. Here, very often it is referred, the project that we work together in is referred to as CRC. That actually is an abbreviation of a certain funding regime by a German group, authority, whatever you may call it, the DFG, the German Research Foundations. To say a few words about this in a moment. Land use change. The presentation, the talk is going to be about land use change and the effects of land use change on arthropods. I'm not going to tell you any news that you've never heard before. I'm pretty sure that everybody of you knows land use change affects arthropods. This has been a long-standing knowledge for, I mean, at least 20 years, more, possibly longer than some of you have been alive. Actually, since the last century, it's been already known that intensive agriculture affects what is living in there. So what I'm going to, is this automatic or do I click? Okay, all right, just to check. No, that's okay. I can tell you to change it. That's okay. Let's do it that way. But this works. Okay, good. Very roughly, the outline of the presentation is going to be that I'm going to be talking about land use change for a moment. What is it? Why do we even study it? This is a question that sometimes comes up when I talk to students. Why do we have to do this again? We know what the outcome is, right? And I will be talking about why we study it and why do we have to feed into the evidence base. Second, EFForTs Project, what is it? What are we doing? I'm not going to go into details on, I don't know, subtropical agriculture somewhere else. I'm going to talk specifically about Indonesia and what we have found out here. And then I'm going to briefly talk about how to reconcile basically biodiversity and agriculture. Is it even possible? Is it a dream? Is it doable? I mean, where do we go with this? We cannot go on like now, it appears. So something has to be done. What can be done? This is what I'm going to be talking about in the third part of the talk. All right, land use change. What is land use change and why is land use change? Well, land use change has been part of human society since the early beginnings, since Homo sapiens had stopped being a hunter-gatherer. And even while being a hunter-gatherer, Homo sapiens was somehow interacting with the environment, felling trees to get food, hunting animals, of course, affecting biodiversity in that way. Whether that constitutes land use change, I'm not sure, but we have to talk about land use change as soon as, or at latest when the agricultural revolution started, possibly even earlier, somewhere around 10,000 years ago or so. So when human society started to live in larger, more complex groups, when population growth started to sort of accelerate, and when agriculture started to intensify and also to expand, it's been quite a question for a while how these things are connected. There were people arguing that intensive agriculture leads to population growth and that leads to societies. Others said, it has to be societies first and then agriculture. And then. So it seems that, of course, this is all sort of interacting in a feedback loop and happening at the same time, as we very often see with natural phenomena and also phenomena in our society. Things interact and happen at the same time and influence each other. They're very closely connected, of course. If you would give me the next slide, please. Agriculture, of course, not just agriculture, everything seems to have changed in the last sort of 100, 150 years when it comes to us and how we interact with nature, right? The last 150 years are somehow crazy. World wars, cars, machines, energy, and agricultural expansion, rapid agricultural expansion. This is a timeline of roughly 2,000 years. Before that, not too much happened, or maybe there is no evidence or very little. However, sort of this is sort of the last, I would say 250 years here, and maybe from here 150 years. Global cropland reaching somewhat around 2 billion hectares, maybe by 2025. This is of course connected. If you would please click to human, or to the increase in the human population. Yeah, we can see just like in this little image that I showed you before, that it happens at the same time. Humans, the human populations is on the rise, agriculture is increasing, and societies become more complex as well. If you think about politics in the last 150 years on a global scale, there have been many experiments, fascism, communism, all these kind of things. Society is also becoming complex and trying out democracy in various forms with various, intermediate degrees. So yeah, we see this interplay between society, nature, and agriculture here as well, and population size. Please. A few words about how we interact with this planet and what is actually there in terms of area. So our planet is, of course, largely water, right? The blue planet. 71% of the area of this planet is covered by ocean, where we cannot live. Roughly a third, a little less than a third, is landmass, where we can live in parts of this. We cannot live on top of glaciers. We cannot live, I don't know, in caves or in deep caves. At least for most of us, we cannot. At least not big cities can be built in caves. So of the land surface, yeah, roughly a third of the planet, roughly 71% is habitable land where we can live and grow food and form societies. The rest is not really habitable for us, including also big deserts where basically human society cannot live on long terms. Of that habitable land, 50% are assigned to agriculture. The other 50% are cities, whatever kind of infrastructure that we have, but also unassigned nature, if you will. Sorry, 50% nature, 35% forests, and then some sort of unused land, the shrubland. This is what makes up the habitable area of the planet that we live in. And of that agricultural land, in terms of area, less than a fourth is actually used for crops. 2/3, more than that, 3/4 is used for livestock. Yeah, you've all seen the images and probably also heard of the question, how sustainable is actually meat production? How sustainable is it to be a carnivore as humans? Well, area suggests it's not that sustainable. It uses an extreme amount of area, and it uses also a lot of this to feed all these cows. yeah, that then are being eaten mainly in the Western world as steak or whatever. This is extremely unsustainable, just on a side note. So we have land and small proportions of these lands are actually used, but 50% of the area that we can live in is used for agriculture, please. We do know, if you click once again, please, we do know that the environment, climate, and biodiversity interacts. If we go back to land use change, this means that land use change also contributes to climate change. Think about carbon stocks. Stuff like rainforests are a huge carbon stock. There's a lot of standing crop. All that carbon is somehow in these trees or in the soil, and this carbon has to go somewhere. If it's, I don't know, a soybean plantation or a corn plantation or whatever. So it's connected to climate change. Please go back. And land use change is, of course, also connected to biodiversity. And this is sort of the thing that we're mostly going to be talking about today, the connection between land use change and biodiversity, specifically for arthropods. The context here is, of course, plant protection. Arthropods interact with plants in a variety of ways. Arthropods are one of the most dominant, if not the most dominant, in terms of biomass, group of animals on this planet. In terms of species richness, diversity, it is also the most dominant group on this planet. So we're talking about arthropods and a little bit about plants, but mostly about biodiversity and land use change. Please. So yeah, we live in the so-called Anthropocene. Anthropocene, yeah, difficult word. My tongue wants to do the R in the back, but it cannot because it's English. Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, you've heard of the term, right? I assume. So the Anthropocene is actually kind of almost like a geological term. It comes from that sort of area. You know that the eons by which the Earth's history is named always has this scene in the end, right? The CENE. We now live in a time where if some future society of whatever starts digging into the soil, it will find something that has been affected by humans. Yeah, so we now have left a geological trace by the way that we interact with the environment, by the way that we have mines, by the way that we have housing and all these kind of things. If human society were about to crumble and sort of be buried under layers of mud, if in some distant future somebody starts digging, they will find this is a geological layer which is completely different from all the other geological layers, and that is called the Anthropocene. However, the Anthropocene is also, so it's a time window basically, yeah. The Anthropocene, where we live in right now, the time in which humans roam this planet, is also characterized by a biodiversity crisis. Yeah, extinctions are on the rise. The numbers of species that are about to go extinct is unclear, to which I will come back later. There are estimations that say roughly 1 million species will go extinct in the next 20 years maybe. These numbers are difficult to do. The numbers and estimations are always based on what you have, the information that you have. If you have bad information, your projections are bad. Your models are bad. Yeah? You need a detailed idea of what is actually there in order to make a projection, which is, by the way, the reason why studying arthropods is so important. You will see here that mammals and birds are, of course, the most affected of these extinctions. This is out of 2 reasons. First of all, because the vertebrates are not usually on top of the food chain, and also in terms of biomass, individual biomass, they're very big, so they're sort of at the end of a food chain or a food web. But it also shows, or it probably is this year is a function of knowledge. We have much more knowledge about mammals and birds than we have about the creepy crawly stuff that nobody really cares about. An ant, a spider, oh. Yeah, people don't study it as much as people study mammals and birds. So there's a sort of conflated issue here. It is probably a true pattern, but it is also influenced by how people are studying this. You will see a complete lack of arthropods here in this graph. Yeah, this does not mean that arthropods are not due to go extinct. or many, actually thousands of species, I would say, hundreds of thousands possibly, maybe even more. Nobody really knows how many arthropods we have on this planet. Yeah, the estimations go wide, up to 25 million species. Yeah, arthropods notably missing from this graph, which is another strong argument for studying arthropods. If you would please go to the, not next slide, but just click. At the same time, as species are being lost or extinctions are on the rise, we do see that populations decline. Yeah, this looks like a shallow slope, but if you look at the numbers, it's actually quite dramatic. What is being done here is it's a living planet index where basically species identity and abundance is sort of conflated and then also normalized in order to make this global, because very often you have these problems that when data is collected from different people in different areas, it's hard to compare. You have to normalize and really smoothen your data so that you can actually see something. So yeah, from one, which is sort of the kind of ideal maximum, to, I don't know, 0.3, showing 60%, 60 to 70% of the population, not of the population, sorry, of the studied animals in this graph, their populations have declined by 60 to 70%. And these two things interplay, they are connected. Yeah. The more you lose a population of a species, the more likely that species is going extinct, yeah, because simply dispersal is being hampered. Then you've got land use change playing a role there, which makes dispersal even more difficult. And at some point, even if the species is still on the planet, sometimes they cannot have viable populations. Think about highly endangered species such as, I don't know, Sumatran tiger, rhino, super small populations. Technically, they're still extinct. They're not here yet, technically, but they're here massively. Yeah. If you would please click again. So yeah, this sort of goes back to this timeline. Yeah, we have experts argue whether there have been 5 mass extinctions in the history of the planet or 7. Let's go with the conservative 5. The most prominent, of course, is the extinction of the dinosaurs, which has happened. It's basically attributable to a meteorite impact on Yucatan, which then threw up massive amounts of clouds and dust, hampering photosynthesis. The entire chain of events is not entirely clear. It's still being studied. However, one of the most prominent extinctions events in the history of this planet that we live on. Yeah, and it's not entirely sure what happens next. We do see those patterns. And scientists talk about the next extinction event that we are part of. Are we cause of it? Possibly. Maybe it's also connected. However, yeah, it remains to be seen. None of us will actually see the outcome because it's an extremely gradual process. Our lifetime is relatively short. We will not live and see the downfall of Earth or something. None of us will see this. We will live our lives happily ever after, most of us. However, it is the question, so what happens next? And it seems as if we are part, possibly the cause, quite likely the cause of the 6th mass extinction on this planet. And this is a problem because usually in all of these 5 mass extinctions, the dominant species died. The dominant species group died off, reptiles. Yeah, this was the end of the dominance of reptiles. Yeah, they were gone. The next thing, what's happened now? Is this the end of the mammoths? I don't know. Is this the end of, what is this? It's the end of something. Yeah. And this is the Anthropocene, right? So this is the context that we live in. The last 150 years have been crazy in that respect. Human population has exploded, agricultural intensification, industrial revolution. These things have interplayed and created a system or a situation in which we know we are affecting the planet and not to our benefit. Partially to our benefit, but also partially not, because we are affecting the climate and the environment. If you would please go to the next slide. Right, yeah, this is what I already mentioned. So what's notably absent in this image that I showed you earlier on is the arthropods. Reason for that being is that there's still a lot of uncertainty about arthropods. I mean, all of us, most of us probably study arthropods. And we, in this sort of little bubble of arthropod scientists, we always think, oh, we know so much. But on a sort of global scale, there's still very little known about arthropods when compared to mammals, birds. And even within the arthropods, there's huge discrepancy between the groups that are sort of popular and being studied, like butterflies, and then groups which almost nobody knows anything about. I'm looking at Azul right now. Parasitoid wasps, extremely important. But what are the species names? We have hardly any idea. We know what the group does, but what do the species do? They're extremely diverse. Possibly one of the most diverse, taxa. But parasite, there's several families, so I don't want to say these superlatives, but one of the most diverse groups on this planet, probably the parasitoid wasps, interacting with plants, of course, as many as you know, as much as you know. But yeah, hardly known. So that is one reason why we need to study arthropods. The other one is something that I mentioned earlier. In terms of biomass, both marine and terrestrial arthropods constitute probably half of the living biomass on this planet of animals, maybe more. In terms of species richness, arthropods constitute over half of the species on this planet, largely unstudied. We do know that they interact with the environment, that they contribute to certain extremely important ecosystem functions such as pollination. They produce, without arthropods, we wouldn't know how to produce fruit in many, many cases, right? How to produce food, no idea. So decision-making processes, we as a society, as a human society in various political ways have to make decisions. What do we do with the land that we live in? Right, and to support this decision-making process, we as scientists, one of the things that we need to do is to provide society with information. That's what we do. We create science. We create knowledge. And the German term is actually quite nice. Wissenschaftler. Wissenschaftler is Wissen, knowledge, and schaffen is to create. A person that creates knowledge. That's a Wissenschaftler. Yeah. So that's sort of our job later on. We produce knowledge, and decisions made by society are always better if they are based on knowledge rather than not knowing something, because then if you're driving in the dark, you're likely to make an accident, right? But if you know where you're going, if you know what's right and left and on center, then you have an idea what to do. So please, next slide. Right, I'm going to the EFForTs Project now. So the EFForTs Project is, well, I'm not going to, the slide with the abbreviation is not there yet. One of the motivations of the EFForTs Project was to look at land use change in Southeast Asia. There has been a lot of, Southeast Asia has, in particular Indonesia, has the third largest area of rainforest on this planet. We've got the Amazon, we've got sort of Central Africa with the Congo, and then we've got the archipelago of the entire of Southeast Asia, but especially Indonesia. Indonesia, of course, contributing the most. And we've seen with remote sensing, just in 12 years, a massive loss, basically, of this rainforest for a number of reasons. Actually, in 2012, Indonesia had the highest deforestation rate in the world, even surpassing the Amazon with, I think, 0.8 million hectares in that year. Right, so, and if we look at these slopes, we do see that here's the total of deforestation, and we do see that that Sumatra is actually leading in that respect. Please, the next slide. So that was sort of the general motivation for the EFForTs Project. By the way, there was a CRC before the EFForTs Project, which looked at stuff or rainforest margins in Sulawesi. So one of the motivations was to look somewhere else, and land use change was it. Sumatra. So we've got a series of images here of the last 30 years, roughly, or actually this is depicting a time frame of 20. Basically, the less green it becomes, the less forest there is. So this has been an influential publication at the start of this EFForTs Project, not by us, but by someone else. That was the background of the study. Please, the next slide. One of the main drivers, if you go back, just one back. Oh, back, please. Yeah. So one of the, I'm not sure if you can see this, but you probably can. One of the main drivers of this environmental change is something that you can see here. Yeah, on the left you see a forest, and on the right you see oil palm. Oil palm is one of the main commodities and export values, of course, as you know, in Indonesia. 80% actually of that oil palm is used domestically on average, 20% roughly being exported, but creating an export volume of somewhere around $25 billion per year. So this is as you know, this is a big thing. Main producer of oil palm is, of course, Indonesia globally, together with Malaysia here, East and West, West and East Malaysia, producing, I think, also somewhere around 80% of the world supply, right? Interestingly, of course, oil palm comes from Eastern Africa originally, but has been imported to Southeast Asia quite some time ago. Please, the next slide. The EFForTs project is, EFForTs is an abbreviation for ecological and socio-economic functions of tropical lowland rainforest transformation systems. Complicated name, but what it actually is important. It's not just, I don't know, individuals doing something. It is a research consortium, which is really important. This is a collaboration, not just between, you know, Budami, Pakpor, and me. There's a lot more people involved in this project. Some of you have been involved in the EFForTs project and have an idea of how big this is. The general concept is that the land use change in Jambi, using Jambi as a model, extends to the social economic side, the social, I don't know, cultural side, the climate side, the soil quality side, any sort of abiotic things that you could measure and think of, and also the biotic realm. So the idea was to bring all these things together to have a really strong evidence base linking all these things from the same sites, from the same area, because very often the evidence base comes from different points in the world, and we're connecting dots that are sort of far away. The idea here was to bring this all together in one physical area with experts in their field, from Gottingen University, from IPB here, most important partner in Indonesia, of course, but also members of UNJA and UNTAD in Tadulako, Palu. Please, the next slide. So the design is a plot-based design, as we call it, at least for the environmental studies and the biological studies. It is also sort of a village design. We see here this sort of map of one of the sort of introduction papers that we did. We have here, maybe I should say why we're working in Jambi. I mean, this is a question that I've been asked quite some time actually until now. So it was clear that the major driver of land use change in Indonesia is oil palm, obviously. There's other agricultural uses, there's rice, there's whatever type of food production, there's also rubber. But yeah, the main driver is oil palm. And so in the beginning of the project, it was surveyed across Indonesia. Where is this transformation at a stage where we can reliably collect data for ideally 12 years? That was the idea. You do know that if you go back to the map, right? So you do know that, of course, here we've got big low, opala. Was that me? Oh. Okay, I can do it myself. Right, so I mean, you know, of course, Indonesia, we've got huge areas of lowland here. There's a mountain range to the west here, but the lowlands are here, roughly, and lowlands are here. Oil palm grows in lowlands. Oil palm doesn't grow on mountains. Oil palm doesn't grow on slopes like coffee or tea. So oil palm grows in lowlands. If you want to grow oil palm, you have to go to lowlands. In Kalimantan, the process is sort of starting, it seems. Very young oil palm, a lot of transformation going on, but still oil palm in a relatively young age. The same seems to be true, by and large, for West Papua and the provinces there, where the transformation is at a relatively early stage. Jambi was probably, and also Riau and Sumatra Selatan, sort of this lowlands east of the Bukit Barisan mountain range, are an area where the transformation has been going on partially since the 70s with Transmigration project. Maybe you've heard of Transmigrasi and the efforts of or the what is it? I'm missing the English term. So Javanese farmers were basically asked and incited to go to Jambi and start farms there. The entire process is transmigratory. I'm thinking about an English word where I cannot, doesn't want to arrive. I'm calling, but it doesn't arrive. Inciting, I think, is something. An incentive. Incentivizing, that's the verb. So farmers were incentivized to come to Jambi and start oil palm plantation there in an area that was previously also logged by state companies. So yeah, that's the reason. It was data quality, basically. We were looking for data quality, very comparable areas, also with transmigrants, which are for the socio-cultural group extremely interesting, and also from like a nation building perspective of Indonesia, extremely important, I would say. Yeah, Java is sort of the center of Indonesia, also the cultural center, and then exporting that to a different place where there are then, of course, conflicts is from a scientific perspective, not just interesting, but also from a global perspective, part of the truth. Yeah, whenever humans move around this planet, there is some sort of conflict. Usually, it never goes without some sort of comparing interests and somehow coming at a compromise. Right. So that's the reason for looking at Jambi. I'm going back. Right. So it's a plot-based design. The reason for that is that we do community comparisons. It's a statistical reason. Yeah, you have to do replicates when you study something in order to find out whether you have a general pattern or not. Think about medicine. The easiest way to think about replicates is medicine. Yeah, let's say you have a medication, or you have whatever, some root, and you want to know if it stops headache. If you test this on one person, and that one person says, it doesn't stop my headache, that means absolutely nothing for the rest of the population. You need to test it on many humans so that you have some sort of idea of how much it works or it doesn't work. So you need replication in studies like these, so that you have any idea of what's really going on, and if the pattern that you see can be transported to potentially other sites. The plot design is, we have 8 plots in lowland rainforest, 8 plots, this is basically our control, 8 plots in jungle rubber, which is an extensive sort of historical land use system involving rubber. And then we've got monocultures of rubber, and we've got oil palm monocultures. Basically in 2 landscapes. This might become important later on, but we will see. What I want to do now is give you just a few ideas of what is happening there in terms of data. I'm not just giving you data for arthropods, but of the entire EFForTs project, right? So environmental data first. You will see a lot of graphs from now on that look sort of like this. Yeah, you will have these abbreviations: F for forest, J for jungle rubber, R for rubber, and O for oil palm. Very often box plots or bar plots or something the like. You see median, no, it's not medians, sorry. You see averages usually in the middle if this is a box plot, and some sort of data variation. What you also see very often is these letters above these letters connect or signify a significant trend, a significant deviation. The way that we analyze this data is usually by some sort of global test, analysis of variance, for example, or GLM, which is also using analysis of variance, ANOVA. And then testing individual groups against each other. As soon as you have different letters, these groups are significantly different. Right, so we do see ambient temperature in these systems rises 1 degree on average. Interestingly, this type of temperature is relatable or comparable to the temperature change on a global level. This is hourly measurements every day for a year. So we do have this. 1 degree is actually massive. It's like the human population wants to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, right? We have here 1 degree between rainforest and rainforest and oil palm. Relative humidity, of course, goes down, which is connected to the canopy openness which increases by 12%. This is used or measured by canopy photographs, and then you calculate the area which is covered by leaves and which one isn't. In terms of biota, what we see, this is sort of plant data. We do see leaf litter fall decreasing from rainforest via jungle rubber, which is relatively similar in many respects to forest, to rubber, which has, depending on when you measure it, relatively little fall. As some of you might know, there is seasonality in rubber, musim gugur, I think it's what it's called, where they drop all their leaves. I'm not sure if it's actually predictable or not when they do that. However, that happens apparently once a year. And then interestingly, quite a lot of leaf litter fall in oil palm. Of course, it's not really litter fall, right? What happens is that during the harvest of oil palm, leaves are being cut to assess the fruit, and then these leaves, or palm fronds as they are called, are being moved into every second aisle. One aisle is the working aisle, one aisle is the leaf front aisle, and there's actually quite a lot of biomass in there, and actually small ecosystems with snakes and big rats and termites and stuff like that. Leaf litter carbon goes down by about 50%. This might be an underestimation due to just technical difficulties. The people that sampled here didn't sample exactly the same as this, but that's just a minor side note. The actual litter is roughly 70%. This is also self-evident, of course, if you have a rainforest and transform it into monoculture. There's, of course, many fewer plant species in that plot. We have ant species plot, which is actually data that we provided to that paper with Kariski. She's in Jambi right now, working on new data. Actually, some of you might know Riski, yeah? Right, so yeah, that's the data that we prepared together. Roughly a decline of 50%, which is actually quite representative of all the other arthropods that we've measured. They all sort of meander around 30%. There are differences between groups, but they all meander around 50%. Now we've done these sort of diversity patterns a lot, and we continue to publish papers in our work together. We look at butterflies. I mean, the immediate collaboration between Paco, Bodami, and me. We look at butterflies. We look at beetles. We look at spiders. We look at parasitoid wasps. We look at various other things. However, we are slowly, and also on the project level, sort of moving away from or finishing up species level analysis and slowly moving towards a more functional approach, which makes it more relatable also to, let's say, other people that are not so involved with this project. So yeah, we did this for ants as sort of a repetition of the pattern that you've seen a moment ago. We see abundance being decreased roughly 50%. Possibly a little bit more. Species richness decreasing roughly 50% over this land use gradient. What we then did is, first of all, we barcoded some of the ant species, the most common ones, probably 200 or so, and assigned traits to them, biological traits, and analyzed how that changes over the land use change gradient. Oh, there's some more biological data first. So we do see community composition changing. For those of you unfamiliar with that, community composition is a form of analysis that brings together abundance and species identity. The reason that there are two circles here for each of these colors is what I mentioned earlier. We have two landscapes in Jambi that we are measuring in, and it seems to be the case here, but also in other response variables, that there is an interaction, statistical interaction between land use and land use and landscape. What that means is that the patterns are slightly different between the landscapes. But on general, in a general level, what you see here is the blue and green corner. That's forest and oil palm, forest and jungle rubber. We do see oil palm community here, which is different from these two, and then the rubber community here. What we also see in ants is that there's an increase of the relative abundance of invasive ants. So out of a set of 200 something species, we identified 6 that are known to be tramp ants. Whether they're tramp ants there, technically we don't really know, but they have certain characteristics, right? Invasive animals always have certain characteristics. They tend to reproduce relatively fast. They tend to be able to colonize a certain habitat relatively fast and exploit resources better than others. That's what makes them invasive. They displace other species. So out of the set of 250 something ant species in our data, only 6 managed to numerically dominate in oil palm and jungle rubber massively, while almost being kind of absent in rainforests. Note that this is a log scale. Yeah, it's not a continuous scale. If you had the continuous scale, it would be much more drastic, this difference. So much to the species abundance kind of data. What we did is we barcoded the most dominant species, or the ones that were not singletons. Sometimes singletons are difficult. The most dominant species sort of in our 250 or something species data set, and we assigned certain traits when it comes to nesting and their feeding preferences. And what we see is, in a similar ordination as before, that soil nesters, the pattern is not very clear, but soil nesters seem to be somewhat associated with red, which is oil palm, whereas in the other groups, it's not entirely clear. So there's a mix of different types of nesters. But the soil nesters in particular seem to be associated with oil palm and not so much in forest. What we also see is that the group of omnivore and generalist ant species also seem to be associated with oil palm much more than with other land use types. We also see that seed harvesters are sort of more associated with oil palm than other groups. On the other hand, myrmecophytic ants that have not necessarily a symbiosis, but a connection to hemiptera, aphids, they are much more common in sort of the jungle rubber and rubber area than in oil palm. We then did a phylogenetic analysis, of course, which is kind of complex and doesn't look too nice, and also feeds into these things kind of, but what does look nice is a relatively simple depiction. So this is a circular phylogeny. Every branch that you see, including those gray ones, is a species that we barcoded. There's 200 or something branches in this phylogeny. And what is colored in green here, blue here, yellow here, red here is the species that are realized in that phylogeny. And what you very clearly can see is that there's a species decline just by counting the number of branches that are realized in the local communities. We could, of course, analyze this statistically, but I think the visual representation already tells enough of a story. I'm getting close to the half hour. How much longer do I have? It's fine? Oh, great. I like to talk. So there's probably another sort of 10, 15 minutes that I have. Right. So within the EFForTs project, we've got a lot of papers. I think since the beginning, which was 2012 until now, so roughly 10 years, we must have, taken together somewhere between 200 and 300 publications. That includes sort of low-level publications to high-level publications. Usually in high-level publications, we throw our data together and try to analyze big patterns. Some of us do. This is sort of a postdoc job. Ingo Grass was a postdoc when he did this. Now he's a professor. So there's also that level going on. So we throw data together, analyze big patterns, and do the major level. We actually try to go into the nature realm now. This is sort of our job now. We've spent quite some money in this project. We do need nature papers and science papers, and they're coming. So let's say second from the top, Nature Communications, this group, we did a study, I think 2 years ago, Ingo Grass being the lead, where we connected the socioeconomic realm with the biological realm. The way that he did that, this is the central figure of this paper, is by looking at profit and how profit in a certain land use system connects, not just in any, I mean, of course, along the gradient that we have, but how does profit connect to biodiversity? And the pattern, and then of course for different taxa, and the pattern is, the overall pattern is relatively clear. The more, so each of these little squares is, the y-axis is a diversity measure of some sort, species richness, yeah, and the y-axis, and the x-axis is profit. And for most of these squares, the general trend is going down. So the more profit you generate, the less biodiversity you have. The mechanism behind that is probably fertilization and chemical and pesticide use. Pesticide and chemical use tends to increase your profits, but it also tends to affect biodiversity quite a lot. And so for all of these groups, we do see this general trend, right? Including vertebrates, bats and birds, butterflies. We do see this, of course, for trees, as we've seen before. We see invertebrates, but we see some weird patterns when we look at the small stuff, yeah? I mean, overbetted mites, mesostigmatic mites, which are predatory mites and sort of omnivorous mites in the soil, they do so show the sort of same pattern, but it becomes almost inverted when we look at bacteria. As a matter of fact, we do see bacterial mass rising and bacterial diversity in terms of OTU, operational taxonomic unit, which is the level that you usually work on when you work with bacteria, because there is no real species. You just barcode and then infer what kind of species you have, or I don't know, some sort of richness. We see an inverse pattern. Yeah, we see that there's more bacteria and more diverse bacteria in oil palm for some reason. There is, of course, an explanation for that. Part of the explanation is that there's more area for biofilm in oil palm. It's so barren that there's a lot of stuff growing apparently, and for some reason this is not the case in forests or in more natural ecosystems. Right, and yeah, then taken together, basically what you see is that the profit here is of course highest in oil palm. This is the background data, but the interesting thing is here is the general pattern for most groups. The higher the profit, and of course the input into that system, weeding, harvesting, chemicals, etc., the less diversity you have. Another sort of paper that is kind of representative of the direction where we're going right now, and the number of these studies will be published soon, I assume, is again looking at functional losses. There's a lot of talk about functional ecology and functional diversity and what this really is. The reason why this is interesting is because it goes beyond just biodiversity, but at the same time it connects to biodiversity. So very often when you have something in your studies and you see, I don't know, here is high biodiversity, there's low biodiversity. In most cases, this will translate into high functional diversity and low functional diversity. High biomass very often and low biomass. However, it's an interesting way of looking at things. You can calculate functional diversity indices if you, for example, assign morphological traits to species on various levels, but also ecological traits such as, like we did with the ants before, like nesting, feeding, these sort of things. You can create a trait matrix. Out of that trait matrix, with a relatively simple R function, you can create a functional diversity index. And it is a measure of, yeah, not just how species diverse as a community, but potentially how many different functions can they sort of do or fulfill. We don't really know what these functions are, but we do see that something is different among them, because theoretically you could have a lot of different species. If they all look the same, if they all do the same, functional diversity would be 1. Yeah. The reality is, of course, different. You have many species, they all do different things. That's a general pattern behind, evolution and biodiversity in general. The only reason that many species exist is because they do different things. So it's kind of a logical loop. Anyway, so what they did here, they looked at spiders, collected 2 different weights. HE stands for heat extraction, they collected a soil core and then used the Kempson method, which uses light and heat to drive the animals out of that soil core and collect them in trays and counted them and identified them. And then LS is litter sieving, so they collected litter and, you know, like a Winkler thing almost or similar, and then sorted those. What you see here is the number of species is this thing. The functional diversity is this. This layer is heat extraction and litter sieving taken together, heat extraction and litter sieving separately. And the trend is just a similar trend as we've seen before, just looking a bit more fancy. You've got forest here, jungle rubber here, oil palm here, and you see a downward trend in, of course, all groups and in this functional diversity. What this means beyond biodiversity is, again, that potentially, you know, what this suggests that in oil palm, the spider community in the litter and in the ground can fulfill less diverse functions and contribute less to the ecosystem functioning than in rainforest. Again, we can also discuss later on this logical loop behind that, because of course there's more functions in oil palm, so therefore there's more species doing these functions. Sorry, not oil palm. There's more functions in a rainforest. The entire system is more stratified. It's a lot more complex, therefore a lot more niches, therefore a lot more species, therefore a lot more ecological diversity and functional diversity, and less so in oil palm. It's all connected. It's not cause and effect. It's all connected and feeding into each other all the time. To the last part of the talk. So I've sort of covered the land use change, why we do, what is land use change, why do we study it? I think I've covered hopefully enough of the effects on arthropods. Generally, the effects of land use change are, well, not good in the, but of course, at the same time, we've got profit, right? And we are a human society. We do need for our development, we need food, we need feed, everybody of us needs money to survive in this society. So we've got these inverse things. How to mitigate these things? I mean, we do see that in the last 115 years, agricultural, not just expansion, but also intensification has led to a system where we clearly see we're driving this planet into a very bad direction. Climate is changing and species are dying off. So how to bring these things together? So within the EFForTs project, we have one side project, the biodiversity enrichment experiment, where we have a commercial oil palm plantation, and we created tree islands in these oil palm plantations, or in that oil palm plantation. Tree islands of varying size and of varying diversity. So oil palm was cut, and tree islands were planted, and what was measured for now the last 10 years was the profit that the farmer or the company is still able to make. Of course, diversity patterns and environmental patterns, as you've seen before with the rest of the EFForTs project. The important thing here is, of course, profit. Whenever you want to reconcile profit and diversity, ideally you have to keep the profit at least the same, or to maybe diversify strategies. If you, for example, plant fruit trees into an oil palm plantation, that has a different effect than if you plant something that cannot be used. So you always have to keep profit in mind. You cannot create a situation in which a farmer or a company would not be convinced to prepare some sort of sustainability measure. Anyway, this is a summary paper of this biodiversity enrichment experiment, currently in consideration for publication in Nature.
Is it wrong that I forced my son to eat off of dirty dishes? I'm 45 female. I love my oldest son, but he's 17 and acts like it. Our family rotates chores. Cooking, dishes, cleaning common areas are all done.
I voiced in this Balatoro. It was like the biggest anime I've voiced in, right? I was so excited to show Michael. I'm like, no, it's really cute and wholesome, I swear, honey. And then I showed him like an episode.
The first episode?
It
Are you sure?
What's a job that's romanticized, but in reality sucks?
The
Being a
trees
therapist.
are
Too many people I've met get into the field thinking it's how they saw it on TV. Affluent white collar, own office, warm, slow pace environment where you get to sit on a nice comfy couch and be like, let's talk about your feelings. That's only if you get to private practice, which they don't tell you is also like running your own small business, which good luck as you have no business acumen. The reality is you get out of grad school, get your first job working at a community mental health facility because they are the only ones who will hire you with a limited license and no experience.
What they see
paid
is
less
that,
than $40K/year if you're lucky, and then get put in a walk-in closet of an office where they dump 100 client caseload on you the first day, followed by your first client who has 5 different diagnoses and is on 12 different psych meds who says to you, fuck you. You're my 7th different person.
Compared to
Did you
oil
know
palm
that
plantation.
guide dogs
In
are
gray,
trained
you do see the
before their blind handlers
area. These are
instruct
called radar plots. Have you
them
ever
in
seen radar
danger?
plots?
This is called
They're actually relatively
intelligent
simple.
disobedience.
So you could.
I knew something was going on because Molly was
Every
ignoring my
beam
commands
here is a
here, but it was
dimension. What you've seen
both
earlier.
safe from traffic.
While Megan Trainor is trending on TikTok, I think it's a great time to remind everyone of the most absurd piece of journalism I've ever seen. Megan Trainor was a guest judge on RuPaul's Drag Race, and at the time she was wearing a lot of these like animal onesies.
This is fungi, this is bats, this is birds, this is
on the show.
and herbs. And the average value is then normalized from 0 to 1. And this creates some sort of an area, an amorphous area. The only thing that is really a takeaway here is that a commercial oil palm plantation has a certain area, and that the tree islands have a different area. What that means is that there's a different multi-diversity in there. It's a fancy word. It just means across taxa, different diversities, which are then connected to different functions. The response variable here is species richness. Response variable here, Simpson diversity, which takes abundance more into account than simple presence absence of species richness. And then also connected that ecosystem functioning, productivity, resistance to invasion, pollination, soil quality, and a few others. And again, the take-home message here is that these areas differ, from which you can infer that ecosystem functions, of course, differ between a commercial oil palm plantation and the tree islands. Again, self-evident. What is not self-evident, and which unfortunately they have not shown, is that the profit does not significantly reduce. And that's within 10 years. This is an important aspect here. So whenever you plant trees, the trees need to grow, right, for a certain amount of time before you can somehow harvest them or use them or whatever. Oil palm has an increment of 4 years. You plant oil palm, the first time that you can use oil palm is 4 years after you've planted it. The trees that we've planted here, they have to grow before something happened with them, before they're even sort of viable. Yeah, and in these 10 years, despite the fact that we cut oil palm, there was an offset of this oil palm cut somehow to this entire plantation, possibly by reduced herbicide use and possibly reduced pesticide, that the profit of the entire company per area did not significantly reduce. That's an important point. It didn't significantly increase, so that these tree islands did not cause something like, oh, now it didn't cause an increase, but it also didn't cause a decrease. It's stable, yeah. The average is smaller, despite the fact that I haven't really used the trees yet. So Humus Undo has not sold any fruit, or I don't know, they haven't really used these trees, but still the profit is the same, which is interesting. Yeah, I think more than 40 oil palms must have been cut for the establishment of this. And still the profit stays the same as before. That is I find this amazing. There is some sort of offset, but it's hard to measure. Anyway, last slide, I promise. And what is also to be seen, and that's of course the important point for the entire plantation, multi-biodiversity goes up, multi meaning many taxa, and multifunctionality goes up. What we've seen in the radar plots before, yeah, the species increase, species are coming in from outside the oil palm plantation, live in there and fulfill some form of ecosystem function, which then of course increases as well. And maybe this is a little bit too detailed to discuss now, but you can measure these effects, or you can measure these effects or break down these effects into direct and indirect effects of the tree diversity or of the tree island size. But maybe this is something that if you're really interested in this, there is a bunch of literature on our homepage. If you just Google CRC-990 EFForTs Göttingen or IPB, you will probably hit our website. There's a bunch of literature linked to that. The main message here really is that not only is it necessary to offset biodiversity in agricultural production, it is also possible. We do see evidence that this is possible in oil palm. There is evidence from, I believe, I'm not entirely sure from where, but there is evidence of this in rubber as well. I mean, jungle rubber could be some sort of but it's not as productive. There is evidence, I believe it's from Thailand, where they try this with a commercial rubber plantation, and it seems to be going into that direction. Take home messages. So land use change is essential for human societies. We all know that. Yeah, and it is also a major driver of biodiversity loss worldwide, and in every ecosystem that we have, and in every biome, but also contributes to climate change. Quantification, and basically the basis for all our work is it's important to have complex data for a complex reality. Yeah, the reality is complex. In order to make decisions, you need to be really sure what the system is that you have and what exactly is happening. You cannot just transfer the patterns from, I don't know, Central Europe to here, even though the general patterns are the same. Land use change, biodiversity, generally the same, but the details are completely different. Intensive monocultures are not sustainable. We do know this on the long run. Despite the fact that we've only had this intensive agriculture for 150 years, we already see that this cannot be sustainable. Insect population is dropping by 75%. I mean, where is this supposed to go? 90%, 100%, and then what? So intensive monocultures is not sustainable. We do need some sort of reconciliation. And this is where you come in. You are the future of science, right? And I mean, if you're entomologists, if you work with arthropods, I think this is one of the major sort of directions of where science is going, to somehow bring together agriculture, not just measure what is sort of bad, what is happening, but also which arthropods do what kind of thing in what kind of agriculture. This knowledge base is super important in order to really reconcile biodiversity and agricultural production. With this, I've talked for an hour, even though I was giving 30 minutes. Yeah, I hope you sort of enjoyed this, and we can.
Thank you.
Discuss.
Let's give a big applause to Jochen. Thank you so much, Pak Jochen. Okay, wow, that's a lot to take in, yeah. It's great. Well, a little bit a background for you. I should have said this earlier. Who we are here. So basically, this webinar is conducted in collaboration with a course that is called the Plant Health. Okay, Plant Health course. So for all the students yang mengambil dasar-dasar kesehatan tanaman, nanti ditonton ya rekamannya ya. So there's a Plant Health course for the undergraduate students, and I've ask them to look at the recording, because we will have this on recording and put it on YouTube at the department, etc. So a lot more people will be able to access that. Okay, that's the first thing that needs to be said. And also, actually, there's a graduate student who's taking a course of insect ecology. So this is perfect for the students. However, the students are having another taking another course. Ada anak ekologi serangga nggak ada ya? Okay, so I will ask them to also look at the recording because this is very important. So I think we have all heard how Jochen has introduced about. I really like the introduction. You know, you really explained a lot about Anthropocene and why land use is very important. So you're really bringing the audience from the step thinking, and then I think people get lost at the end. not because it's you are not clear. It's very clear, but I think the level of understanding is not easily, the concept may not be easily grabbed. So this is why we have the webinar, so they can learn from you. Okay, so what else here? Okay, you explained a lot about the efforts also, which is good. There are some questions. Okay. Okay, so there's a question here. So for those of you who are here, this is a great opportunity to ask directly to Jochen because he is here. Jadi jangan malu-malu, mau tanya bahasa Indonesia juga boleh, bahasa Inggris juga sangat boleh. Jadi jangan malu-malu. Nah, sambil menunggu untuk membuat pertanyaan, ya, there's a question here. Do you want to read it yourself? Yep. Okay.
Maybe I'll just read the question. So, hi Jochen, as you mentioned earlier and stated also in the paper that reducing fertilizer and avoiding herbicides, I think the person is referring to one particular paper or another attached experiment, the oil palm management experiment, has a good effect on biodiversity, so that you suggested to use low-intensive management. Are you planning to continue to your research to prove serious finding? What's next? Do you think that's... Okay, sorry. This is a question about low-intensive management. What does it's a long question, but low-intensive management. Does low-intensive management promote, that is the word I was looking for, promote biodiversity? I would say in general, yes. So there's a couple of lines of evidence from Ruang Sidang project, but also from our project, that suggests that you can reduce your herbicide input and you can reduce the weeding without losing productivity, while at the same time conserving insects, very generally speaking. So yeah, that's an important avenue to go. It seems as if this really depends on the context. So it really depends on the soil that you're planting that oil palm on, and the sort of baseline data. So I guess it could be a potential future that I see in this is that commercial plantations do a baseline survey of how much they actually need, and do a very sort of standardized set of experiments for a year or 2 or 3. And then they've got their baseline, and then they know how they can reduce their weeding, how they can reduce fertilizer input, how they can reduce pesticide input, while at the same time keeping the productivity. I think this is an important deliverable that we, but also BEFTA can give. Yeah. There's many more. What is the main key to successfully maintain antagonist microbe biodiversity in wetland? And that's a compound question. I'm not really sure I can.
What is the main key
to
successfully maintain antagonist microbe biodiversity in wetland? Oh, okay. So basically, an antagonist microbe is supposedly it's a good microbe.
Yeah.
So that's why he's saying. But then he's talking about wetland.
The answer is simple. Keep the wetland. If you want the antagonist.
Okay, Pak Ismet, jadi jawabannya keep the wetland. Jangan diubah menjadi apa-apa pun.
At least keep some. I mean, there's of course efforts around the world to try to disturb streams going through agricultural land as little as possible, or to at least plant herbs and trees next to these streams so that there's a feedback loop between the biodiversity on these streams, water filtration, and then the pasture or the agriculture next to it. So, but yeah, very simple question is, we keep as much as from the wetland as possible, while at the same time producing whatever needs to be produced.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The third question is actually for me, from a policy. But before that, I think mungkin saya bisa go back and forth ya, bahasa Inggris dan bahasa Indonesia. Ini mungkin tadi message yang sangat penting dari Pak Jochen ini kan sudah menunjukkan bahwa ketika kita melakukan mengubah dari kompleks ekosistem kepada ekosistem yang sederhana, yaitu oil palm gitu ya, itu pasti akan ada perubahan. penurunan biodiversity, penurunan ekosistem function, dan pokoknya basically akan mengubah. Nah, yang terakhir tadi itu menarik ya, penelitian yang terakhir tadi menunjukkan bahwa ketika ada palm oil yang kemudian mau diubah, bisa nggak sih kita tuh mengembangkan sebuah sistem agroforestry. Jadi penelitian yang terakhir tadi itu menunjukkan bahwa sawit, ya, ketika pohon sawit itu ditebang, ya, kemudian dikasih tanaman lain. Jadi tadi mungkin menunjukkan ya bahwa sawit itu bisa ditanam dengan tanaman-tanaman lain. Dan tadi kan dikasih durian, kasih jengkol, kasih pete, kasih sungkai, macam-macam. Nah, dia datanya menunjukkan bahwa walaupun ada penurunan 40 pohon sawit itu dibuang, ya ternyata perusahaan ini yang dipakai untuk penelitian profitnya nggak menurun, ya. Jadi penambahan pengayaan pohon di dalam area di mana sawitnya ditebang kemudian diganti dengan pohon lain itu ternyata tidak menurunkan profit dari perusahaan, ya, tapi kemudian meningkatkan biodiversity. Nah, ini yang sebetulnya menarik gitu ya. Kok bisa gitu ya? Jadi mungkin ada offset, tapi offsetnya di mana belum diketahui. Nah, itu ini ujung-ujungnya kan kita ingin mencoba bagaimana sains itu bisa memberikan solusi, ya, bahwa profit itu bisa seimbang dengan biodiversity. Data-data di awal kan rata-rata orang menunjukkan ketika biodiversity menurun, profitnya naik. Ya. Nah, penelitian ini menunjukkan ketika biodiversity naik ternyata profitnya tidak turun. Nah, itu tadi bagian terakhir yang menarik. Nah, ini saya menjelaskan itu karena ada pertanyaan dari Bu Sat Rahayu yang menanyakan bagaimana mengkomunikasikan ke pemerintah Indonesia hasil temuan Bapak Jochen bahwa monokultur tidak mendukung keberlanjutan ekosistem. So the question is, how do you convey this question to the government, to the Indonesian government? So the result here shows that monoculture is not sustainable, but how can you convey this to the government? Jawabannya gimana, Indri? Okay.
Well, I mean, there's a general pattern to that and a specific. It could be a specific question. The specific strategy that we are having is that this is not the responsibility or the mandate of the German part of the project, but the Indonesian part, and you are very closely connected to various levels of government. And we put out information. That is the specific question, but very generally speaking, I mean, what science usually does is publications, right? And I would go very sort of conservative almost by saying that this is the sole job of science, to produce primary literature that then is used by other people, usually scientific communicators. There's an actual profession of science communication, partially done by people who have training in these fields, but science communication is usually sort of at home in the media, yeah, in newspapers. Or they have science communicators that look for certain topics, and somehow wrap them up and produce that a summary, whether it's online or in newspapers. I don't think it's the job of science or individual scientists to go to the government and say, look, I have a solution. Look, I have this, I have that. We produce information that is in a very basic way. Of course, there's another approach to that. There's the approach of more applied sciences, which, yeah, I mean, draw from basic science to actually look for solutions, but these solutions are very often connected to the private sector, right? Applied science or medicine. Applied science is very much at home in the private sector. When, I don't know, Monsanto wants to know something, they hire scientists and the scientists give an answer to Monsanto so that they can make more money. Put it very simply.
So can the answer be, it's not the job of the scientists to change the policy, but it will be the job of other type of scientists who are more applied, the science communicators, etc.
I think it's the job of society.
Oh, it's
as
the
a
job
whole.
of the society. Okay.
I mean, politicians come from society.
Okay. So it's a job of the society to influence.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, I mean, of course, society influences politicians by electing them or not electing them.
Okay.
This is the way you might think that maybe you're not.
Yeah.
But this is how we interact with.
Oke, jadi itu jawabannya ya Ibu Sap ya kurang lebih. Nah sebelum itu sekarang saya mau melempar ini ada satu pertanyaan. Bu, can you move upper the chat? My question is above. Tapi di sini nggak ada. Jadi bagi yang ini tolong Ibu siapa nih? Jauhar Habibi. Tolong ditulis aja lagi ya karena tidak terlihat ininya di. Wait. Nggak ada di sini. Jauhar Habibi tidak itu. Jadi tolong ditulis aja lagi. Oh, from Jambi. Can you explain more about the phenomenon in oil palm site? It has highest leaf litter fall than the others, but it also has the lowest litter carbon. Okay.
I think it's the other way around. Litter carbon was high and leaf litter fall was low.
Okay. Kembali.
That's a methodological bias. So the litter carbon was, I don't have a good picture here. So oil palm is planted in a way that you have basically two alleys. One is the working alley, one is the alley where the leaf palm fronts are being placed after harvest. The difference between leaf litter carbon and leaf litter fall was that the leaf litter fall was not measured in the stacks where the palm fronts are. So it's a method bias. It does not represent reality. There's a lot of, not just carbon, there's a lot of actual leaf litter in oil palm plantations. That's the explanation. That's why I had this little star there. It's a method bias, which is of course important to be aware of. Yeah.
Okay. Method bias metode ya. Oke. Yang dari sini kalau ada pertanyaan, mangga. Ini tadi kita pertanyaannya dari itu semua. Biasanya orang kalau ngechat rasanya lebih bebas dibanding kalau ngomong langsung. Tapi jangan kayak gitu nih, Pak Jochen sangat baik, tidak menggigit. So don't worry. Oke, ada pertanyaan apapun, monggo. Ini kesempatan luar biasa. Silahkan. Ayo dong, jangan malu-malu.
If you don't ask, I'm just going to say something.
Yeah.
So you can steer the direction where I'm going to talk about.
Apa tadi ada gambar yang kurang jelas? Tadi kan ada grafik-grafik yang mungkin baru pertama kali dilihat gitu ya. Silahkan. Mungkin Rami atau Ferdian ada yang mau ditanya? Ya Ferdian silahkan.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much for the chance to ask some question. Okay, I wanna honestly, I'm really interesting about three islands. It's really how could I say it? It's really interesting. Like we always talk about the oil palm, how maybe some people talk about how bad it is, but here we show them that like we have maybe a problem solving about it. Like we have three islands. But yeah, I want to know more about this.
In a different company that then wasn't responsive anymore when we wanted to start, and so that design had to be dropped. In the end, distance to forest is not being used anymore. It is not part of the experimental design. From what I understand is that the plots. We have 56 research plots plus some controls. I mean, treatment plots plus some controls. They were randomly assigned positions in a grid that was superimposed on the map of PT Humus Indo. This is, from what I understand, I wasn't technically part of the establishment. We're collecting samples there now. Actually, in a year or two, I will know more about this, having understood this. But I think it's a random placement. So the design, I think, uses for each group, for each size and diversity level. So diversity level goes from one tree species, two tree species, 3, 4, 5, 6, as far as I understand. And then size, 5 by 5, 10 by 10, 20 by 20, 40 by 40. Each combination of these things, I think there are 2 plots or maybe 3 plots of each combination of these factors, and then randomly positioned in this plantation PT Humus Indo. I hope that answers your question. I think it's a random assignment. It's quite it's a complex design, and it's a little bit of a tricky thing to analyze. But if you reduce the factors to a sort of an easy design, just diversity and size, and separate them, you can go at this with ANOVA or GLM sort of statistics. That works. Maybe the keyword, oil palm plantation and bad reputation. It is true that oil palm has a very bad reputation.
Well,
mainly in Europe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's a European thing. It's European centric, this entire image thing, and very Europe centric to think that consumer ideas have any impact on what's happening here. Zero to none. It's all based on image, which is very funny, and at the same time not so funny. Image driven by media reports. People are, on the grand scheme of things, people tend to be a little bit simple, yeah, and influenced by very, very simple messages. It has had a huge impact. These images of, I don't know, a sad orangutan in a destroyed forest, and then the linkage of that.
Yeah,
it's an emotional thing.
Then in Indonesia, here people say that, well, this is actually, it's a war about, it's a trade war between oil palm and the canola oil and rapeseed oil, etc. So then it becomes very complicated. Yeah.
This definitely plays a role.
Yeah.
This trade war, but I don't think that the media is really interested in that so much. I think it's mostly media driven by just this is bad, this is bad. I'm not sure how strong the European media is influenced by the trade situation. I'm not so sure about this. My point that I want to get at is oil palm should not have this negative image.
Yeah.
I mean, oil palm is one of, yes, it's of course connected to rainforest loss, and this is a sad thing. However, if it weren't for oil palm, we would need much more area to produce the same amount of vegetable oil.
Yeah.
Plus, we don't have, I mean, oil palm is actually, I dare not say it, but I will say it. Actually, oil palm is pretty amazing.
Okay.
It is a system which can grow 20-25 years. It has, in a certain age bracket, sort of between 10 and 16 years of age, the oil palm is very biodiverse. I don't know any agricultural system that is as diverse and has that much biomass, plant biomass, but also arthropod biomass in it as oil palm. Compared to any annual system, corn, whatever, anything that we grow in Europe. Of course, we have seasons, therefore we cannot grow oil palm, yada, yada, yada. But I mean, it is quite biodiverse, quite a high biomass of stuff. And it produces something that we cannot really replace, I think. It produces a vegetable oil much more efficiently per area than any other crop. That is very high in saturated fatty acids, which means that it's at room temperature, 21 degrees Celsius, it's kind of hard, which makes it extremely valuable for cosmetics and also things like chocolate. Almost every chocolate product has oil palm in it, so that chocolate stays hard at room temperature. The only other vegetable oil that can do that is coconut. Coconut as well. Maybe some others too, but for coconut, I mean, if you would need probably a much larger area. Interestingly, there are now trends across in Europe, let's say, or Western world, whatever, that cosmetics companies, they are now advertising with using coconut, because coconut doesn't have that bad image. So they're using coconut oil, right, or coconut fat, to market their products. And I think it's simply an image thing. Coconut doesn't have a bad image. Coconut has for Europeans especially, has an image of holiday, beach,
romantic,
beauty.
tropical country.
Yeah, it's good. And oil palms, bad, rainforest destruction, fire, orangutan, sad. It's a very simplistic view that drives decision making, which it shouldn't. That's also another reason why we need research. We need real data.
We need research.
Actual reliable data. And then people can make decisions.
Ada lagi? Masih ada. Oke. Indri, kemudian itu dan Rani. Sorry, saya nggak tahu namanya. Lutfia. Oke, Indri dulu.
Sure. Dulu ya, sekarang ya.
Oh maaf Ibu, ya mohon maaf, saya Indri dari ITSL karena saya tertarik sama slide-nya Jochen yang reconcile agriculture with the biodiversity, that ada 3 gambar di situ yang species richness, systems diversity, sama ecosystem function. Ini sangat menarik sekali. Saya ingin tahu, kamu kan mengambil dari 2 data ya. Dari sini kelihatan kalau ada dari yang enrichment plantingnya B11 or your data, and the convention dari oil palm monoculture ya. Mungkin kamu bisa jelasin, saya sendiri nggak tahu bedanya 3 gambar ini. Species richness ini dilihat dari apa? Maksudnya basis datanya. Bagaimana menggambarkan? Did you get my questions?
Kind of. Yeah. I mean, you're basically asking where the data is coming from.
Not data, but how the explain, because I clear about the systems diversity, which I mean I don't know exactly. Maybe here plantation more, but in soil science I don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, basically explain about what is Simpson. How do you measure?
Or what the Simpson index is?
All those 3. What is species richness?
Oh, okay. What is that type of data?
Okay. Simpson, and then the 3rd one, ecosystem, especially ecosystem function. What do you mean by ecosystem function?
And how to do it?
Because it was very quick.
Yeah. I mean,
ini dulu nanti ya.
Yeah. In biodiversity studies, there's a lot of indicators that you use. Species richness being one of the simplest ones. You collect something. Yeah, the next one, I think. This one, probably. So there's various indicators that you use, species richness being the simplest ones. You collect something somewhere, you determine 2 species if you can, and then you have a certain number of species in a certain plot. That's species richness. The species richness is presence absence based, meaning you do not count how many of a certain species, or you do not need to count, you do not take into consideration how many there are of a certain species. It's just, is the species there or is it not spirit, and how many of the species is there. And then within a replicated design, you then have an average or whatever that you can compare. And then there's various indices, mathematically derived indices, which take abundance into varying account. First one being Shannon, second one being, it's hard to say. So there's this concept of abundance driving diversity information. Very often what you have in local communities is that you have a few very abundant species, and then slowly, sort of, if you rank them by abundance, you have many, many rare species. The rare species drive diversity patterns. The abundant species, however, tend to drive more of the function of an ecosystem. And you can mathematically allow abundance to influence your data. And then you come up with an index. How How much of the abundance in a local observation do you allow to influence your diversity? And then there's a lot of these indices. I don't know, you can also use them for, I don't know, distance measurement, Sørensen index, whatever. You've got Shannon, you've got Simpson, you've got plenty of others. You've heard of them before, I'm very sure. This is how you describe diversity, and they all take abundance into varying account. Yeah, and this is just one of them. Why they exactly use the Simpson index here and not another one, I don't really know the argumentation to that. I would have to really read their methods, which I didn't do into detail here. There is some sort of reason. I assume the reason is that there is the largest contrast to the conventional oil palm, just to show. But Simpson is one of these indices of, has anyone of you heard of the series of Hill numbers, or the concept of Chow and Hill, where you can mathematically increase the degree by which abundance in an observation influences diversity? It's a mathematical concept. In the series of Hill numbers of Hill 0 being species richness, Hill 3 or 2 actually being Simpson diversity, this allows abundance to interact the most with your species observations. And still they do see a pattern. So that's a detail that I find interesting. Anyway, so simplest index, how many species are there? Then some sort of abundance being part of this. And then ecosystem functioning, that's a good question. Generally, ecosystem functioning, I assume that they derived it from the proportion of a local community that does a certain thing. So let's see, I don't know, soil quality. Let's say soil quality. How do you measure soil quality? You don't measure soil quality by measuring soil quality, and your soil quality is from 0 to whatever. You probably do this. So they sampled a lot of animals, right? They probably look at the proportion of the community that is known to improve soil quality. I don't know.
Maybe worms.
Yeah, they treat you worse. I mean, animals it's connected to biodiversity, but you have, of course, in a local community, whatever that is, you have a certain group that is detritivores that contribute to decomposition. The more of those you have, the better your soil quality is. So it's a derived index. The more you have, the higher your kind of abstract value of soil quality. I assume that's how they did it. Predation and herbivory, it's definitely also abundance-based. I mean, relative abundance-based. The more animals you have that are predatory or herbivory, the higher that ecosystem function is. So it's basically related directly to what was collected somehow. And then it also connects to the ecological traits that I mentioned earlier. You can assign certain traits to certain animal groups. Yeah, a parasitoid wasp, for example, biological control. If you have a local community with 50% of the biomass is parasitoid wasps, and the other 50% is something else, you have 50% sort of biological control. You can make this abstract and then measure it. And this is how they measure these ecosystem functions. So it's a derived function based on what they found. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Okay, that doesn't make sense for me to answer now. I would give you or you would have to look for the script. I mean, this is a complex script. Yeah, no, I mean, R uses code, right? I mean, it uses a certain language. So I cannot like read the language, you know.
Okay, ada pertanyaan.
Selamat sore. Mohon maaf Ibu menggunakan bahasa Indonesia. I'm sorry, I'm for Indonesian language.
Tidak apa-apa.
Okay. Sebelumnya perkenalkan saya Lutfi Aziza, mahasiswa kehutanan. Nah mungkin sedikit menarik tadi terkait dengan sawit dan agroforestry ya Ibu. Bagaimana yang ingin saya tanyakan itu bagaimana bisa tetap profit. Nah prosesnya itu bagaimana? Proses bagaimana dia bisa terjadi. Lalu yang kedua itu pertanyaan yang kedua terkait dengan apakah ini bisa digunakan di tempat lain.
yang memang memiliki sawit. Nah, terima kasih Ibu.
Jadi pertanyaan pertama, bagaimana sawit masih tetap profit? Dia sebenarnya tadi juga nggak tahu. So the first question, you catch that? No, the first question is actually about exactly what you said earlier, that it didn't decrease. Yeah, you're not really
Yeah, it didn't
sure.
increase.
Yeah.
I don't fully know what. I have to admit, when I presented, I just copied the images from that paper, the main key messages, the details as to why it is not decreasing the profit. I would have to look in the discussion. I'm pretty sure that there is some part of this. They mentioned it somewhere, but it certainly isn't as clear as we would like it to be. Otherwise, there would be a paper about this, I'm pretty sure. If we knew exactly why the profit doesn't decrease or what it is that offsets it, there would definitely be a publication.
Jadi itu masih perlu waktu untuk bisa menjawab itu.
Yeah, that is, maybe you have to wait, or it is too complex. I mean,
it's too complex.
Prices fluctuate.
Yeah. But then the second question is, do you think that it can be replicable to other sites?
We don't know, but I would think yes. Generally, yes.
Okay.
I mean, the general pattern that we are seeing is, the main thing that we're seeing is that profit doesn't decrease on the entire plantation scale, but broken down to area. Yeah. And we see that we attribute that to reduced herbicide use and reduced chemical use, reduced labor for biological control and weeding.
Okay, jadi kemungkinan tidak lebih meruginya itu karena ada penurunan dalam penggunaan pestisida, herbisida dan sebagainya. Jadi biaya yang dikeluarkan itu menjadi berkurang ketika kita mengurangi pestisida atau mengurangi oil palm, dugaannya gitu. Nah, apakah itu bisa direplikasi atau tidak? Secara teori sih bisa, tapi ya ini masih preliminary, perlu data yang lebih jauh. Apakah orang mau untuk menggunakan itu atau tidak?
One shouldn't underestimate how long it takes to create a system like this. I mean, this is 10 years old. It's a tree system.
Dan sistemnya lama, 10 tahun apa gimana baru kelihatan.
Very preliminary still, but I find it interesting that even in this preliminary data, we see very encouraging results.
Yeah, that's very important to note. Last question from Rani.
Okay, thank you, Bu Dami. So I want to ask you two questions. For the first, I want to ask you about new species along this project. Maybe you can, are there new species discovered along this project? And the second one is maybe I want to see the effect of temperature changes to the population of insect. Which stocks or which family that very sensitive to the changes. I mean that become the concern to scientists to monitor them. Thank you for the question.
So new species, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sumatra is an area that has not been worked on a lot by taxonomists. There is probably a high degree of endemism in Sumatra compared to Java, different species groups. What we have, so I personally did canopy fogging. It's a certain technique, method to collect animals from tree canopies. In our data alone, we've collected, I mean, overall and identified something like 750,000 animals now, arthropods. We tried to identify many of them, probably half of those 2 species, and we do see varying degrees of uncertainty in some groups, parasitoid wasps. The degree of uncertainty, meaning likely the degree of undescribed species, is close to 100%. In something like ants, probably half of the species are undescribed. In bigger or more commonly studied animals such as butterfly, very, very few. I think in a data set of 120 or so species of butterflies, only 2 undescribed. So we have made efforts to describe species. There have been species descriptions of spiders from the ground and from the soil. I'm not aware of any descriptions of new plant species. I'm not aware of that. We have described together one ant species, Overbeckia jambiensis, a very rare ant species, previously not only recorded in Singapore actually, but now known from Jambi and Papua, PNG, and Singapore. So yeah, the answer is there's a lot, possibly thousands of undescribed species, but very difficult to find people who actually want to describe them. Second question was, how does temperature related to the presence or absence of certain groups? I have never, so we've used a series of environmental variables, including temperature, to explain species presence absence or species groups presence absence. The problem with temperature is that it's connected to the canopy structure. And in every statistical model that we use, temperature, humidity, and canopy structure is autocorrelated. And then what you actually are forced to do is decide for cause and effect. Cause is canopy structure is reduced, effect is temperature. So what kind of survives in almost any statistical model is canopy openness and not temperature per se. We would probably find similar patterns, but it's hard to say which ones exist. I mean, we have this 1 degree, right? This 1 degree on average temperature difference between 2 meters height at a forest and 2 meters height in an oil palm plantation. Extremely difficult to disentangle that from the entire system change. I mean, how can you would have to, if you want to know how does temperature drive taxon presence or absence, you would have to do that in exactly the same system, ideally, to isolate temperature from all the other factors. Here we have a land. Have to
So, thank you so much, Jochen.
Most welcome.
Okay, so I would like to say thank you to all of you and also to the people at Zoom. We have come at the end, so it's now 5 minutes to 3. I mean, past 3. And this has been a very inspiring presentation. We learned a lot, and thank you so very much. And let's give a big applause again to Jochen. And hopefully we'll see you again in another opportunity, and also to the Zoom community. Thank you for being here, and please stand tuned. We will have another speaker in the next 2 months. Here I am talking about in October, there will be another speaker, and hopefully you'll join us. So thank you, and see you in the next 2 months. Bye-bye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Well, I would like to say a million thanks to Professor Damayanti for guided our discussion session, and also a million thanks to Dr. Jochen who have delivered a great material. And today and now we are going to the next agenda, and there will be a certificate appreciation which will be given by Dr. Purnama Hidayat, MSc. Please welcome Dr. Purnama Hidayat, MSc.
Thank you. On behalf of the department, I would like to thank to Pak Jochen and to Dami. So the first certificate I will give to Pak Jochen. And of course to Ibu Dami.
Okay, now we are in the last session of this event, which is closing. I want to say thank you to Dr. Jochen, Professor Damayanti, and the audience entirely. As MC, if I made mistakes or offend someone here, please forgive me. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. Oh, you don't come.